Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Welcome, everybody, to this pandemic podcast episode of Into the Impossible, a production of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination at the University of California, San Diego, where we are still sheltering in place. And today we have a wonderful new author who has published a fantastic new book, which is generating tons and tons of buzz and virality, as is befitting of such a wonderful work. And it's Sarah Frier. And Sarah's a technology reporter for Bloomberg News. Her award-winning features and breaking stories have earned her a reputation as an expert on how Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter make business decisions that affect their futures and our society. Frier is a frequent contributor to Bloomberg Businessweek and Bloomberg Television. She lives in San Francisco. Are you sheltering there currently somewhere in San Francisco?
I'm here in my apartment in SF, yes.
Okay, great. It's good to see us. Our friends in Northern California are doing well, and it's really a treat to have you on the Into the Impossible podcast. So,
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure. So your book is really fascinating because it reveals a lot of insights into how technology and science and the type of science that myself and my colleagues work on is really becoming molded and melded to things that are normally associated with popular culture, influencers, celebrities, and things like that. And throughout the reading of your fascinating book, and I read it, I listened to it. I meditated on it and it's really phenomenal. Everyone should get all three different copies, all three different versions, and read them all, listen to them all simultaneously. But what really spoke to me is the kind of lessons that can teach us as a society about both these huge endeavors that are influencing our lives in ways that we could have scarcely predicted a few years ago. And so today I want to talk with you a little bit about the insight that you gleaned and help the reader glean about these huge tectonic societal shifts and why they matter to us and what might be coming next. So it's really a treat to have you here. I want to start with a blurb or a review that I came across in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend. And the author writes that No Filter offers an engaging account of how tech founders' ideals inevitably have to be squared with making profits. Instagram experience usually feels like it's about more than than just the company's bottom line. Over the past few months of pandemic-provoked lockdowns, many users have been trapped at home. The influencers, the normal people, the celebrities. Instagram has stood out as one of the platforms many of us relied on to document and connect each day, despite being physically apart. So I want to ask you first, how has Instagram affected you? I mean, obviously you wrote the book over the last probably year or two. How is it affecting you as we speak during this, this pandemic that we're all suffering from?
It's so interesting right now to think about Instagram because it has, as I described in my book, it has become this place where we go out in the world and we share what we're doing, and we use it as this tool to present ourselves as interesting, fulfilled people full of travel adventures and great dining and cocktails and friends and all these things that we talk about on Instagram and build our lives around this visual aesthetic. Now we're all home and we're using Instagram in a very different manner. We're using it for live video. We're using it for messaging. We're using it to tune into cooking tutorials and workout tutorials, live concerts. And so suddenly this tool that has become sort of performative in our society has become something more for human connection, which has been a nice transition. Of course, there is a dark side right now in COVID, as well as a lot of faulty information about healthcare is transmitted on Instagram from these influencers. But for the most part, what I've seen is a lot of people trying to have this moment of solidarity. But I think that will change as cities open up more. We'll probably see more of the FOMO that we've come to know and probably hate from Instagram. The idea that some people will be willing to go out and experience the world the way they did before, and other people will still be too scared to do so.
Okay. Yeah, that's really fascinating. And one thing, I look at, well, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the book itself and the physical book especially being this physically distant, but, socially connected. I mean, it's social distancing. It's really put the social media and social distancing. And I think that that's really a fascinating development. And some people have said things like, I couldn't have survived the pandemic without Instagram. Also things like Netflix, obviously things like that. But it's become so integral, this thing that didn't exist. Like somebody said, I wish, I'm so glad that the pandemic didn't happen 30 years ago, because we didn't have Netflix, or we didn't even have the internet. And you and I were chatting. Yeah, go ahead.
The current usage of Instagram and Facebook is upwards and beyond anything they've ever seen on a constant basis. Like right now, we are using Instagram more than we do during, for example, the ball dropping on New Year's Eve.
Wow.
Turning midnight around the world. That's when people tend to log in and say Happy New Year and post their videos of fireworks. Right now, we're doing that constantly because we're home and we're bored, and we crave this social connection that we can get from a more visual medium like Instagram.
Yeah. You and I were chatting just before we started recording about Zoom and how, unfortunately for your book, I mean, one of the treats of an author is to go on a book tour. And I know that you'll get that chance to do that someday. And it'll be so exciting for you. And you've earned it, certainly by the production of this lovely book. But Zoom has made it really possible for us to do these podcasts and to do these interviews. I don't think I would have maybe gotten access to you if there wasn't this, unfortunately, this really tragic event occurring in society at large. And yet, we somehow made do without Instagram and Zoom and things like that. Even, a couple of years ago, their popularity is just taken off incredibly virally, as everyone now is familiar with how that term got its name. I want to talk just about the book. I always say I always ignore the advice to not judge books by their covers, and so I judge every book by their cover. And your book has a particularly kind of interesting cover, and it's a sort of a double entendre, I think, in the title, as I would expect our French listeners to say. Can you walk us through the cover? What went into it? Did the publisher pick the title? Did you pick it? How did it come to be this title? I know you worked on stories for Bloomberg that led to this, I believe, led to the writing of this book. But how did the actual cover, the design, the elements, the colors, et cetera, how did they come to be?
Well, I happen to have the book right here.
Yes, very nice.
So people can take a look. So basically, I learned from the founders of Instagram that they really appreciated simplicity. And when they were building Instagram, they wanted to strip it down to its most basic components, photography, and do that one thing very well. And so I thought that if I was going to do a book that adhered to the Instagram aesthetic and gave that sense of Instagram, it would need to have a lot of simplicity to it. So that's why we have just the basic letters, the colors that are the same sort of gradient that you see in the Instagram logo. And the gradient is actually a reference to the filters, the veneer that goes on our images to make them more artistic for Instagram, which is, of course, how the app started and got so popular. No filter, I loved the multiple interpretations of the title. I love that no filter is the phrase that people use when a photo is too beautiful to be edited or already showing something perfect in the world. No filter. It also speaks to the fact that the default on Instagram is very cultivated, curated, edited images. That people have to say no filter when they're putting out something that is raw and true and real. And I also thought that it was important to tell the unvarnished story of Instagram. That for my years of reporting, I've constantly heard about how they are just living harmoniously within Facebook as a company within a company, how they've really used Facebook's tools to grow. And, but basically Zuckerberg was like a board member to Instagram as opposed to a boss. And of course that wasn't true. And so I wanted to tell the story with no filter. So multiple interpretations of the title and the cover here, but that's sort of how I was thinking about it. And took a while to convince the publisher because you don't usually start book titles with the word no.
Oh, that's very interesting. I have Nobel Prize, which has no in my book, but yes, that's right. That could be seen as maybe poor marketing. Well, in honor of the gradient, et cetera, here's a picture of the gradient that we posted on Instagram for the Simons Observatory, which has the same color palette. My shirt, I wore this in your honor, and the roughly hewing to the color choice that you use. I want to talk about this quote. When you read this quote in the New York Times, they called No Filter a sequel to The Social Network. How did that make you feel? How did you react to that? I could imagine a few different ways it could go.
Well, so I think that, so there are some positive aspects of that, because The Social Network was the first movie that really introduced the public to Mark Zuckerberg and helped people sort of understand him as part of our popular zeitgeist. And it was, of course, a caricatured version, a Hollywoodified version of him. But that helped people understand the beginnings of the power of this company and this dominating force. But the other aspect of it, of course, is that you read the book, so I didn't want to just tell a business story. And I think the Social Network movie and the book that it's based on are very much about the boardroom drama, the backstabbing, the legal issues that come across when building Facebook. When I wrote this Instagram book, I wanted to interweave the corporate story and that corporate internal drama with the story of how the product impacts us day in and day out, with how the many small decisions that people make within the company and their personalities and their egos and their motivations, how those things affect our human behavior, and like drawing a line between the two. So I think that the Social Network takes it one step, but I went a step further and tried to explain not just like, what do we care about this in terms of good and evil, in terms of domination, but what do we care about this in terms of its effect on us?
Mm. Yeah, and I think it is affecting, it is having, if you had said a few years ago, oh, Snapchat will be so important for disseminating even scientific information. I'm showing a video that we posted. This is taken by our intrepid director, Deborah Kellner, who's a French filmmaker who's making a documentary about the Simons Observatory. This is a time-lapse shot from the Atacama Desert, and she's on Instagram, so hopefully she'll tag this. And if I had said, well, heard Snapchat would make this big impact, I would have been really dubious because, physically the technologies are so radically different, and yet, they're often spoken about in the same breath. And I started thinking about, well, what has been the impact of this? Like, how has it affected just my, little fiefdom of astronomy and the only subject that I know particularly well? And I looked up how many pictures has NASA posted on Instagram, and it's or how many followers does NASA? And it's in the millions, hundreds of thousands and millions of likes and shares every day. And it's perhaps the most effective, this and maybe Twitter, arguably, because NASA is very active on Twitter. And the individual players at NASA, a friend of mine or a colleague of mine from San Diego, Jessica Meir, I interviewed her on the space station, and she was taking pictures of the Earth throughout her 6 months in space, doing spacewalks. And it's had this tremendous influence. I don't think that other competitors, say like TikTok or Snapchat, really have this influence. And before we get into the technology, I just want to take one step back to what you said about the drama and the founders. I was listening to a podcast this morning, and they were discussing a biography of one of the presidents, maybe. And this biographer said, well, you have to either love your subject or hate your subject, and to do a good job. And I felt like Kevin Krieger Kevin Systrom and Mike Krieger, they're not really like as hateable as, or not, I'm not saying hateable. I mean, I don't have anything against Mark Zuckerberg, but he's portrayed in that movie as villainous, kind of venal, conniving guy who like cuts out his friends and just wants to meet girls. And he doesn't come across great. I don't want to say that intentionally. It's just, he didn't give you access, right? And Zuckerberg sort of denied access to your interviews in the book.
Yeah, he gave me one quote
Yeah, and you go through that in the book, and I'm just like, he doesn't even, make an attempt to steer the story. And it's like, if it's true, I was thinking just in terms of financially, like it's an option. He could have had, if he could have steered the message differently on the social network book, he probably, would have taken that opportunity nowadays to change it rather than just suing them or whatever he did back then. But here he is with an opportunity to talk to a bright young writer, and he just like blows you off. So I think he's much more villainous. And again, I have nothing against him. I've never met him. He's a great supporter of a lot of charities and stuff that I value very highly. But what do you make about that? That the two founders of Instagram come off very, very likable. I wouldn't say that they're like really lovable. Like you don't feel super passionate about them. So how do you react to that quote? You didn't write it. This is not a biography by any means. It's an insider's glimpse into the making of this, this product that's changed the world. But how did you approach those two characters? I mean, did you find to, feel for them? Did you feel for their struggles, or what was your impression?
I think that the most important thing to understand is that everyone in one of these stories is human. Like Zuckerberg has his way of viewing the world. Kevin Systrom has his way of viewing the world. And in the contrast between the two of them, you can understand them both better. And Jack Dorsey is also a character. He's the CEO of Twitter. He's also a character in the early part of my book. And you understand, his emotion tied up in why he invested in Instagram. And so much of what happens in Silicon Valley can be boiled down to those human urges, despite the fact that we think of them as hackers, we think of them as cold-hearted, direct-minded people. There is a lot of pride wrapped up in everything that they do, and devotion to the idea of success. And Zuckerberg, I think, just has a very black and white definition for what success looks like. Success looks like growth. It looks like getting bigger. It looks like reaching more people. And he very much has this utilitarian attitude about it, where the ends justify the means. If you add more people to Facebook, sure, they might sell illegal drugs. They might post about terrorism organizations. They might build anti-vaxxer communities. They might do all these things. But he thinks that the ends of it, the network community, this globally connected world that he wants to create, justify the means. And that's one reason why he has been consolidating power and making sure that people don't really question that future, and has been so steadfast about deciding that his way of doing things is the right way, because he has been proven right in the past. And so I think that when you look at it that way, he's not so much a villain as he is trying to repeat his past successes by being very unable to listen to his critics in a way that, like, anything that his critics say does not discount the fact that Facebook is getting bigger, more people are using it. And I think his biggest flaw so far is that he thinks that the more people using the product, the more good it is for them, because why would they use it if it wasn't good for them?
Right. I think you either said this in an interview or in the book, like when Bill Gates said, when he dies, he wants it to be, he's the richest man who ever lived. And you said something like, when Steve Jobs died, it would, he created Apple, and kind of I couldn't avoid seeing the parallels between, unfortunately, it's always these stories of men in Silicon Valley, and obviously you bring in other characters, and they're incredibly important in the book, but these huge egos and how much of their identities are wrapped into not only the products that they create, but attributes of the product that comes to shine in this book. And that, as you say, Zuck is focused on the growth of not the aesthetic, not the technical details of it, but how do we monetize? How do we grow it? That's how the way that he keeps score. And you make this point very clearly that people like Kevin and Mike, to some extent, come off as more obsessed with the craft of it. And what I found so fascinating is the parallels between these great titans of tech, and how it seems to just play out like in every generation. Like there's this famous saying attributed to Max Planck that science progresses one funeral at a time. And I feel like, it's like technology is also kind of progressing like that, maybe tell me if you agree, but it seems like, the aesthetic side is being picked up by the Instagrams and the Kevin Systroms of the world, whereas the Microsoft Gatesian obsession with domination and so forth is being taken up, the mantle is being taken up by Zuckerberg and Facebook.
I think that's true, but I think that I would take it a step further and say, like, you cannot, or at least Zuckerberg thinks that you cannot fully scale or quickly scale a product if you care about the little details and the little touches and the tone of something and the craft of something. At a certain point, when you get to 1 billion users, or even hundreds of millions, you start to lose control of what the community does, and it gets boiled down to its most bare incentives, which is get more followers, get more likes, get more comments. Like, the people using the platform start to define what it's for, as opposed to the company. And I think that Kevin and Mike, they were very focused on promoting the good of Instagram and of showing off how wonderful it was that all these communities were connecting and how simple and perfect the community could be. Meanwhile, the people who use Instagram, some of us as humans have a more Zuckerbergian mentality where we're all about growth. And now that we can see the measurements at the top of our feed, we can see the analytics, we know what kind of content does better on Instagram, and we can adjust our behavior. Just like Zuckerberg adjusts the Facebook product, we can tweak until we know our best photo angles, until we know what works. And I think that was really interesting to me, to see these Facebook tactics be taught to us at large as a society, while Instagram is trying to teach us how to be creative and cultured. It's kind of interesting to see that ultimately what wins out is this drive to grow and appear successful, and to measure that success in a way that is more numbers based as opposed to subjective.
So another thing that really spoke to me in the book is you portray the competition that endured even after the acquisition, the famous acquisition, which created so many headlines. The first kind of app unicorn, 13 employees, and you go through, and it's really it's amazing, because it must have been a challenge for you to like make something suspenseful when a lot of people already know the story, how famous it is. I mean, talk about the challenge of portraying a story and making it so exciting when the outcome is sort of spoiled. The spoiler alert was out there years before the book.
As journalists, we're always focused on answering the question of what's happened and what'll happen next, and trying to break the news and get the details, and then we have to move on to the next story. And with a book, what you can do is you can go back to all those people that were involved in the story at the time and say, how did this happen? Why did this happen? Who argued for what? And what did they say? And who was in the room? And what could it have gone differently? And that was really fascinating to me, because before I went into this project, I didn't realize that the Instagram employees didn't make and for the most part didn't make money off of the deal. The news stories at the time said that Instagram is now worth $77 million per employee, right, and everyone just assumed that they were all millionaires. No. And in fact, that's not how it worked out. And there were other aspects. Like, I had no idea how heartbroken Jack Dorsey was that Instagram sold to Facebook instead of to Twitter. So in peeling back those layers, you understand the human side of the story and all of the factors that went into the part of history. So it's kind of like a decoding project where you figure out, like, these are just people. I mean, there's not any sort of rules to how these things are done. It was the first $1 billion app acquisition ever. Yeah. And they kind of just invented history as they went along. And the way that they decided to do things, it was not inevitable. It's not like this could have just happened with any photo app. We could have lived in a completely different world depending on the different decisions that they made.
Yeah, I was not aware of this, pre-existing app called Bourbon, and you go into that fascinating history, and the counterfactual of, how this could have played out. I first, just because it's my prerogative, it's my podcast, I want to ask you, don't you think it would have been more natural for Twitter to buy Instagram? Isn't it sort of more Twitter-like than Facebook-like? I mean, now it's like Instagram by Facebook on the bottom of the app. It just seems like you go into that, and it's just like kind of jars me. What do you think? What was more natural, even with the benefit of hindsight? Is Twitter really, or is Facebook really the right home for it?
Well, I think Twitter is more natural, and that's also why Instagram didn't want to go there, because it was too similar. When the Twitter board looked at Instagram, they saw, wow, this is the perfect way to post photos on Twitter. Like, this is a parallel network. It's pretty much the same thing. It still is as a follower model. So one of the biggest differences between Facebook and Instagram is Instagram, you can follow people who don't follow you back. And that's the same as on Twitter. There's anonymity on Instagram. You can have multiple accounts on Instagram the way you can on Twitter, whereas Facebook is all centered around real identity. Right. So when they would, if they had gone to Twitter was saying, oh, Kevin Systrom could be head of product at Twitter and also run Instagram. Like, there wasn't as much clarity of like the division. Whereas when Zuckerberg went to Kevin Systrom, he said, you can be CEO, you can be independent within Facebook and we won't touch you.
Yeah, and that's exactly segues into what I wanted to talk about next. It struck me as so odd, the scenes that you portray in the book are really kind of unsettling in a sense. And I tried to make an analogy because I'm, just a simple-minded astrophysicist. But I was thinking, when we hire a professor, like a young professor from, say, someone who's a postdoctoral fellow, so after graduate school, you probably know, you might become what's called a postdoctoral fellow or scholar, where it's kind of a purgatory in between being a graduate student where you work for somebody else's projects and when you're starting to come up with your own ideas as an independent scientist. And so if we're trying to hire somebody, we don't like hire a professor and then say to her, now you're a threat. Like, now what you do is directly competing with what we do or I do. I was on the hiring committee. No, it's not like that at all. Or when you get married, it's not like, well, let's say you worked at the same company. Now you're like a threat to my promote. Like, it just seems, for lack of a better word, it sounded a little bit like, if you look at Facebook as a corporation, as an individual, that they have zero emotional intelligence. It just struck me as so odd to set it up. And yeah, they had to carve out a CEO and make, that was one way of handling it. But what affected you about the way that they were perceived as almost like this enemy cell within Facebook, or compete?
Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer, right? I think Facebook needed to buy Instagram in order to make sure that it didn't take away from Facebook. And one of the things that really shocked me in reporting this out is just a few weeks, or within a few weeks of Instagram joining Facebook, they go through their orientation, they get set up in their office, and the only guy working on analytics at Instagram goes to meet with the growth team at Facebook, and the growth team says, hey, listen, welcome to the team, but we're not going to help you guys until we find out if you are going to be at all of a threat to the amount of pictures that people post on Facebook. So already they were willing to sacrifice the potential of this asset that they paid $1 billion for, which was unheard of. But they knew that the most important part of the acquisition was taking Instagram off the field. From there, once they figured out that it wasn't a direct threat to Facebook, then they could build it up and have sort of a Facebook 2.0 within the company. But that was foreshadowing for what would happen later, of course, when Instagram gets to the size where Zuckerberg does feel like it's a threat to Facebook. And you're right, I feel like that's not the way that if you are a consumer of these products, you think it would go. When I went into writing this book, when I put out my proposal to do it, I thought maybe I would be writing about Facebook's future. I would be writing about, this thing that at a time that Facebook is under scrutiny, it's been widely critiqued. People are leaving it and saying that they have a bad experience there. Mm-hmm. They're escaping to Instagram, and maybe Instagram is like the second wave of Facebook's dominance in the world. And when I started digging into it and realizing that Facebook did not want that to be the future of the company, I thought that was really interesting. It just speaks to what we've been talking about, ego, and about Zuckerberg wanting to achieve dominance in the way that he sees fit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like a Greek, tragic kind of fatal flaw, but you can't argue with success. And as you mentioned in the book, they're kind of different ethos that they would staple, on Post-it notes or paint on the wall, versus the way that Kevin and Mike were more kind of open, even with you described like a glass garage door, partitioning their office. It's sort of, versus the walled garden. And I think it was in your interview with Kara Swisher, I think it's a month ago now when the book first came out in April. And you're talking about, just the level of kind of almost dread that one feels when one logs onto Facebook and like, am I going to see some stupid red dot, versus Instagram, which is kind of like delightful and provocative, but and it kind of draws you in, and you're not going to be just like, you're the product as soon as you get on there. But I want to talk about how it became so viral in your opinion, and really what it means to you now, which is really centered around the thought, like, I personally don't really care what some Kardashian wants to, promote, if, her lipstick or whatever. What is sort of the responsible for more of the success? Is it the everyday people? You talk about these accounts that went viral overnight from like a dog account, just like so cute. And like, I'm listening to your book and I'm like, typing into Insta, I got to follow this account, like everybody follows the Instagram, main account. But what about the kind of the dichotomy of usership, between the ultra famous influencers, who clearly make you feel like the product, versus the individuals, the riffraff like me, who feel like, oh, we're using it as a product ourselves?
I think that what it's done is it's made everyone a potential famous person. Mm-hmm. That if you just tried at Instagram and decided to come up with a brand, or decided to come up with, whether it's your photography or your baking or whatever it might be, that anyone has the potential to become an influencer, or even has the potential to be seen by other people in society as interesting and worthy of attention. And so I think that the big effect of Instagram is that it's become this societal benchmarking tool. It's like something where, if you walk down the street and you'd see on someone's forehead how much money they make, that's kind of what Instagram is. You would look at someone's follower count and say, oh, this is how culturally influential this person is. Just crazy to have in our society. Even
with the verified,
yeah,
check marks.
We've never really had something like that before. And I think that can provide great opportunity for people. So, like the owner of that dog that you talked about, or certain fitness instructors who got into the millions and following, without going through the normal gatekeepers. So if you want to be an actor, if you want to be a comedian, if you want to be a singer, you kind of just start on Instagram and get to your dream a different way. On the flip side, it creates this tremendous amount of personal stress for people who are using it and caring about those metrics, and even forcing people, they feel like they need to do this in order to be successful. And so they'll cheat and they'll buy followers, or they'll buy comments, or they'll adjust their appearance through Facetune or plastic surgery. And I think that it's that sort of harmful effect that we need to understand about Instagram, so that we can kind of give ourselves a break from the pressure we feel.
Right. Yeah. And I think that is, that's endemic to all these, channels. It's sort of like, it's ironic in this age of coronavirus that we want to be viral and be famous. And I remember watching this, there's a documentary with Bill Murray in it, and he says something to the effect of like, you don't want to be famous. Like, try being rich, because, rich gives you most of the perks of that being famous could even potentially give you, without a lot of the risks and downsides of being stalked and having Big Brother and AI and content reviewing.
Getting hacked. A lot of people get hacked on Instagram.
Right. And their most intimate things go out. To me, I'm always thinking of this quote by George Orwell in Animal Farm, when he talks about Benjamin the donkey. And I think the pig talks to Benjamin and says, oh, you have such a nice tail. And the donkey says, the Lord gave me a tail to swat away the flies, but I'd rather not have the flies and not need the tail. I can sort of identify. Luckily, with 1,000 followers, I don't have to worry about that. I want to talk about technology, and we chatted before the show, and I think you have the same publicist, or the same folks at is it Simon & Schuster?
Yes, that's my publisher.
As Peter Diamandis, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago now. And I'll talk to you about what Peter and his co-author, Stephen Kotler, describe as the 6 Ds of technology, of exponential organizations. And according to Peter, those are digitization, deception, disruption, demonetization, dematerialization, and democratization. He talks about different fates. In fact, he uses the different fates between Kodak and Instagram to illustrate how these different technologies really affected the world. I mean, Kodak had essentially the first patent on the CCD camera, on the instant kind of digital camera, and they squandered it, and they wanted to remain entrenched with their technology of physically printing out photographic film, whereas Instagram could scale up, and Kodak's a shadow of its former self. But I'm wondering about the technology, in his language, these different forces, the exponential forces that are coming over time. There is a limit to exponential growth. We can't, we don't live on a planet with infinite resources. We don't have infinite numbers of people, although, sometimes it would seem that way. But how does Instagram and even Facebook counteract these exponential realities, growth with the reality of living on a finite resource planet?
Well, isn't it crazy that the biggest barrier to growth for Facebook is not competition, but the limited number of people who use the internet in the world?
Yeah.
I mean, that is just mind-blowing, right? Like they have about 3 billion users of all Facebook properties now. So that's Facebook, WhatsApp, Messenger, and Instagram. And there are about 7 billion people in the world. They already have the majority of the world's internet connected population using Facebook.
Yep.
The rest are in China. Basically.
Outside of China, right? Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, where Facebook properties are still blocked. And so the way that Zuckerberg is trying to build upon that, I mean, he's running out of ways to grow infinitely, but he is trying to increase the number of connections between people. So one of the things that really frustrated the founders of Instagram is Zuckerberg decided that he wanted to build a mega network, that he wanted to connect the networks of Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger and call it one family of apps and have it all operate under Facebook so that people could message each other, whether they were on WhatsApp or Messenger or Facebook or Instagram. They could message each other on other platforms and therefore increase their overall network. He's also trying to get people to use Facebook groups so that they can befriend people who they haven't met in real life. Mm-hmm. Because if you're in a Facebook group and you're talking with a lot of people about a certain topic, you can befriend each other without ever having met. And so by growing these networks to be larger, he increases the potential for the freshness of the platform and also the amount of value we get from each other. But there's a flip side to that, which is when our networks are bigger, we share less intimately and we don't feel as comfortable being our full selves. And so I think that although you can look at it in a very utilitarian grow mentality like Zuckerberg does, you also have to think about the costs of that growth for the experience of the user.
Yeah, that's certainly, the threat, I would say, is, kind of over-engineering the product. And, it's clear that Facebook has enough talent that they could have made an identical replica of Instagram. In fact, you describe their very efforts to do that and their challenge faced by Snapchat. I wonder, just personally, again, my prerogative, you don't have to answer any question, but do you use Snapchat? And if so, how much? Because I find it not appealing. Maybe I'm, pre-boomer, okay, Gen X guy, but nevertheless, I don't see the appeal of it. Can you speak about that? Is it a threat to Instagram, Facebook?
I think that it is more in the messaging category and more for young people. I think Snapchat is intentionally difficult for older people to use. It is, you swipe up, swipe down, left and right, and it's not very intuitive for people who started on computers. But I do think that for the younger generation, because they have that smaller network, they can be more intimate. And Snapchat is actually bigger now than Twitter.
Yeah.
Crazy to think.
No,
but it is.
Market cap.
And
by market cap or by user base?
By user base.
Oh, wow. It's also, I think market cap is bigger too.
I think you're correct about that. And the other big threat is TikTok. TikTok has become a major escape for young people during coronavirus because it is full of happy videos. Yeah. Things showing pets doing silly things and dance moves and cooking. It's just a different kind of experience as opposed to what you get from Instagram, Twitter, where you have to create the content.
Yeah, yeah, I am. Yeah, just to give my millennial credentials, I am on TikTok. So,
There you go.
but I'm not. I'm trying to do 1 minute general relativity quantum electrodynamics lectures on Twitter.
Oh, I love that. I should follow
Yeah,
you.
yeah, great. You double my follower base. So I hope you. But I look at it and I think about, you write about the really the early history and even the tie-ins with Jack Dorsey and Twitter. And I started thinking about it in terms of, and you must have had this cross your mind too, that both the emergence of Twitter and Instagram came about after the 2008, 2009 financial collapse, and really the popularization of Facebook. Really, that's where the takeoff point and the ramp of exponentiality took place for Facebook. What do you think will be that for this COVID generation? Do you think it's something like TikTok or something like Snapchat, or is it something that nobody's thinking about? And in the words of Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, if we don't make the thing that kills Facebook, somebody else will. If we don't make the thing that kills Twitter, what is next? What's going to come out of this COVID pandemic that could rival something like an Instagram?
I think it's very possible that something will come out right now. Whenever there is a big disruption in the way people live, there is always opportunity to fill the needs of everyone. And I haven't seen it yet. I mean, TikTok is certainly, I would say TikTok has already emerged. Snapchat has already emerged. I wouldn't consider them startups.
Yeah.
What I think that we will see is something that helps people feel entertained, connected. But so far, the big bets that have launched have not fulfilled the need. Like Quibi was this big video platform that just launched a 6-minute videos for people during quarantine. They thought that people would really want to watch it because they'd watch it during the daytime as opposed to the evening when they watch Netflix. Hasn't caught on.
No.
So I think that people are going to keep trying new things, and this is the time to attempt it. Because with constraint, there is creativity. That's one of the things that the Instagram founders learned early on. They made square photos, and they thought with the square photos, it'll be just like Twitter's 180 character limit. With constraint, people become creative. And what bigger constraint on the way we live than coronavirus?
Yeah. So I've a past episode last year, I talked with Julian Guthrie about her book, Alpha Girls, which is a wonderful book. And I've recommended that she get in touch with you about female founders in the Silicon Valley ecosystem of the 70s, 80s, 90s. And one thing that really comes out of her writing and that really kind of eerily echoed in your writing is that this is really a book about leadership in a stealthy way, because I think you go through and kind of I almost feel a little bit like Kevin Systrom is a little bit pathetic, not like in a negative, but just that you have sympathy for him because he tried to be he studied how to be a leader. I mean, he was trying to be a leader.
He tried.
Yeah, and he took courses, and you talk about how he has these slogans.
Had a management coach, was a big personal improver.
Yeah, and you kind of see this, it's parodied in Silicon Valley, the TV show. It's just like having your gurus or whatever, and you talk about that he took you feel almost bad for him because in the end, it's hard to feel too bad because he's got $1 billion, but he's also 36, 37. He just had a kid. Where does he go from here? And well, let me take a step back. What leadership lessons can you take from him? Because we often have situations where we'll have an experiment and it's an arch competitor of ours, but we obviously could be much better if we merge and achieved a synergy. Do you think ultimately he fell sort of on the sword to do what's best for the child or the creative, the thing that he created? Or do you think he just had a failure to see that this huge python was going to swallow him like a pangolin? No, I shouldn't say that, but
pangolin.
Yeah. Do you feel that he was just kind of unaware and almost kind of got what he deserved because he didn't game out in his mind all the things that it could be taken away from him?
I think he was a very strategic person in terms of his diplomacy internally at Facebook, and the fact that he didn't get it right really bothered him. I mean, he thought that he had Zuckerberg figured out. He thought, as long as I keep growing Instagram, as long as I ramp up the revenue and I keep users coming back, then Zuckerberg, and also if I help crush the competition, then Zuckerberg will respect me and reward that effort with more independence, with more resources. And in fact, the opposite turned out to be true, that when he did crush the competition and build up Instagram until its growth was accelerating in 2016, Zuckerberg then looked at him and saw a threat. So I think that he miscalculated what was going to happen if he succeeded the way Zuckerberg wanted him to. And I think that sometimes when we do what we think we should do in order to win, it doesn't always result in the way that we think is most logical, because we all have our own biases around what we think, like leaders. I guess I should say Kevin Systrom was on Bloomberg Television a couple of weeks ago.
My colleague Sarah Frier just came out with a book about Instagram called No Filter, and her conclusion is that Facebook is underinvesting in Instagram-specific problems. I wonder if you agree with that, and if so, does that concern you about whether Instagram's growth will falter? I mean, Instagram for investors is one of the great hopes of Facebook's overall growth. Should they be concerned that Instagram won't grow like it did?
Well, I haven't read the book. I did live the history, right? And I saw places where I think we invested appropriately and places where I wish we had invested more. But the truth of it is that we grew the platform to over 1 billion people, and you don't do that with nobody, and you don't do that with no resources. That being said, I don't know what's happening on the inside, and for me to speculate what investments have or have not been made is very difficult to do from the outside. But, if I were in charge of Facebook and I saw something like Instagram, I'd obviously invest a lot in it to make sure that, it becomes another pillar of the many products that we have as a company. And I think that's just the logical argument to make and the logical thing to do. And I think Mark's a very logical person, and hopefully he's following that.
Well, he thinks in that moment that he's appealing to Zuckerberg's logic. But really, the thing that ultimately helped Zuckerberg make the decisions that he made was more about ego, more about how he perceives his own success. And so I think that painting Zuckerberg as too one-dimensional, as too focused on the numbers, discounts the fact that he's also human. He's also trying to win as a leader too.
Yeah.
So I think that at a certain point at the top of a company, there's only room for like one guy who feels that they have the perfect vision. And it was only a matter of time before they clashed.
Yeah. And you see this a lot in one of the people who blurbed your book, Ashley Vance, in the book about Elon Musk. And you've seen this obviously in Steve Jobs movies and the books written about him. And now you're seeing, and The Social Network, and now you're seeing it in No Filter, your wonderful new book. I want to conclude or start to wrap up a little bit with thinking about technology and how technology will influence the future of things like Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, et cetera. And that's this notion of 5G connectivity that's very important here in San Diego, because we have Qualcomm here, and Qualcomm is one of the pioneers, has some of the first patents in the 5G space. So again, Stephen Kotler and Peter Diamandis spoke about, well, this is going to be one of the most transformative technologies that will define the future, will be the advent of 5G. And I'm wondering, and that's primarily because of the reduction in latency between different effects taking place on the internet, and queuing and more targeting of individual handsets. Do you see the technology of things like 5G or anything else being used to kind of augment Instagram in the way that, say, Snap glasses or whatever they're called? Snapchat had their Snap, or still does maybe. Google had their Google glasses. Oculus was acquired by Facebook, thanks to Instagram, for 3 times as much money as you talk about in the book. Is there a technology that will augment Instagram, or will it get left behind potentially in this 5G revolution?
Well, I think that there are a lot of use cases that you could imagine right now. Like, what if you could watch a live musical act and everyone in the musical act was performing from their own home, but they could all hear each other and harmonize? Like, that would be really cool. So I think that there are ways that you can do more real-time face recognition technology, Facebook, there's the data aspect of it, right? Like Facebook will be able to quickly understand what's happening in our videos and be able to target us ads in real time based on what we say and do, which is kind of a scary thought, but it's certainly more possible in a 5G world. We can lean a lot harder into video as users, and I think we're already seeing that happen during coronavirus. I mean, we're doing this call over Zoom. I think that kind of thing will become a lot more prevalent. I think that we might skip over VR as the technology that will be life-changing and maybe switch to AR. We're already seeing that become quite useful on Snap and these funny face filters, but there would be many more applications for it down the line, like for telemedicine. So I think that there are certainly possibilities with Instagram, and I've seen a lot happen on Instagram with regards to live video that I didn't expect. And I think that we'll be able to see a lot richer content.
Yeah, I had a nightmare after finishing the book on Friday and realizing, well, what happens when the first person, does their live Instagram feed of their, plastic surgery to make themselves look better for Instagram. It's just their infinite regress.
I think that's already happened.
Oh, really? Oh, God. My
yeah,
nightmare.
People have
Sorry.
done live surgeries.
Oh, why'd you have to tell me that, Sarah? I wish I could unlearn that. I want to finish up because we only have a couple minutes left. I want to finish up with the kind of where are they now and where do they go from here? So, being kicked out of a company, is a hard thing. A founder of something, especially at a young age. Now, he has a billion reasons, or the better part of a billion reasons that might assuage some of the pain of the blow of being let loose of this company.
Hard.
Yeah, but what is he doing now? I mean, you usually hear these politicians retire even when they're young because they want to spend more time with their family. That's noble. It is, but what are they up to now? These two founders.
Well, Mike Krieger just had his first kid. Kevin Systrom had his second. He learned to fly a plane.
That's right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Generally, the two of them say that they are trying to figure out what they want. They're sort of decompressing after this 6-year high-intensity period and trying a lot of things, a lot of experimental things. And right now, they're doing a very interesting project called RT.live. What it looks at is the reproduction rate of coronavirus in certain states, the likelihood that a person who is infected will infect other people. Oh. And so remember how I told you in the beginning of our conversation that for Instagram, the most important thing was that they solved the issue as simply as possible, that they focused just on photos. Well, now they're doing that with coronavirus. They're trying to give a website where you look at it and you see a very simple answer about whether a certain state is safe or not. So that's kind of interesting, but I don't think that's their next company. I think that they're going to continue to noodle on what they'll do next, but I do think that they're likely to do it together.
Well, that's good to hear, and that they maintain that connection to one another. A lot of times it kind of drives people apart, even families. You win the lottery, and then that's the end of the family as you descend into addiction and resignation. Okay, so we're going to finish up with 5 questions that I call the final 5 on the Into the Impossible podcast. You're here, Sarah Frier. His amazing new book, No Filter, has really captured, in a way, not just the technology, the rivalries, et cetera, but the real personalities. I felt like you're a detective, really unraveling some of these very intimate personal details of the story that would have remained hidden without your intrepid journalism. So I thank you so much for bringing this book to life. So the final questions, some of them revolve around books, and some of them are just to learn, so our listeners can learn from high achievers, top performers like you. I'll start with 2 that are about books. So Carl Sagan, I had on his daughter and Ann Jurian's daughter, Sasha Sagan, a couple of weeks ago, and he spoke about books as magic, as sort of a device, a technology that can insert somebody's words. And nowadays, he wrote that before, audiobooks were really popular. Now you can actually hear the voice. I believe you narrated the introduction, right, of No Filter.
I did.
And that was really lovely. And the other narrator, she did a wonderful job too. But I want to ask about the future in this book and kind of what you see as the long-term influence of the book. I usually ask people, would you rather have, if you're an author, would you rather have 100 people reading your book a year from now, or, or one person reading it 100 years from now? So I'm going to ask you that. Even though it's about a technology, it's also about, eternal stories of rivalry, of competition, of struggling and documenting a particular phase in the world. So which would you rather have, Sarah, 100 readers tomorrow or one reader 100 years from now?
Wow. Well, I would hope that if 100 people read it tomorrow, that somebody will find it 100 years from now. But I think that it is, it's already feeling like a story about a moment in time, that people will look at this as the 2010s in Silicon Valley. And I think that the New York Times said that in their review, especially now that our lives have changed so much from the time of this book's publication. You can look back at it and see it as a slice of this dramatic increase in visual communication, this force that affected society. And so it would be very fun if somebody read it 100 years from now.
And as far as those readers, either now or in the future, hopefully you'll have plenty of both. What would be your preference for people to read it? Would it be people that are kind of either skeptical that Instagram is really, kind of an important enough contribution to our culture, people that really view it and decry its negative influences on society, as we touched upon, or people that really are just super curious about, how did it grow and so forth. So kind of haters or fans, what's your ideal target audience if you had to choose one?
My ideal reader is somebody who has known about Instagram's impact on their life and who has maybe changed their behavior to adhere to Instagram, but doesn't know why. And they read the book and then they understand the behind the scenes, why we do what we do on Instagram, how we got there, that they can then take a step back and think, okay, now I know why I act this way or why my friends are acting this way. And I can disentangle myself from this pressure and then understand how to use it in a more healthy manner.
Very nice. Okay. Next question revolves again, sort of on past advice, if you will, or stuff in the past. So the title of this podcast is one of the Into the Impossible podcast, is one of Arthur C. Clarke's famous laws. His first law is that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. You may have heard that. And the second law is that the only way to find out what is possible is to venture beyond a little bit into the impossible. So looking back at your career and where you've been, is there something that seemed very difficult when you were, a younger person and starting off, that having done things such as writing this book, which is a huge accomplishment, you would give advice to your younger self in your 20s or what have you, that you've been able to see by going a little bit into the impossible, you can achieve such great things?
So the advice to my younger self?
Yeah, basically.
Well, I think I would say that when you're starting out your career, you start out as a people pleaser. You start out trying to be helpful, trying to be curious, trying to fit in where there are gaps. And it took me a long time to understand that my opinions and my way of seeing the world was valuable. And so if I could go back and talk to my younger self, I would want her to understand that it's okay to say what you want to know, and to drive your own coverage and to drive your own questioning, and not wait for someone to ask you to do it. Mm-hmm. And because once I got to that point in my career, once I realized that what I was doing was of value to people, then I started to get the confidence to dig into projects like this.
Oh, very good. And the next question I ask all my author guests is, who's going to play Kevin Systrom in the movie treatment that I'm sure you're working on?
Oh my gosh, I'm so bad at actors. One person told me Keanu Reeves, but he might be a little old, and shorter. He's still a good one, still a goodie.
And still might not be tall enough.
Probably would need to be someone tall. You're right.
Yeah. And then the final question. Who do you think? I was thinking about that, and the guys who played the Winklevi twins, that guy or those guys, I think that'd be a good. I was actually surprised that if they really wanted to get back at Zuck, the best thing that they should have done is bought Instagram, when it was younger and smaller, and they could have taken it just directly venally.
Instead, they went into Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Maybe that was a better decision. Who knows? And then last question is just where can people find you? What are you working on now? Yeah, a little bit of the plug zone. So let us know what you're working on next. Is it another book or other projects that you're involved with? And then how people can find you.
So I'm a reporter at Bloomberg and Business Week, and I'm still digging into all of these same stories. I just reported on Facebook's acquisition of Jiffy. I've been reporting on the effect of coronavirus on tech workers, all sorts of things in that vein. You can follow me on Twitter at Sarah Frier, or Instagram also at Sarah Frier. That's where I tend to post the most of my stories. And the one thing I'll say is I always look forward to hearing from users of these products. I think that you can't fully tell the business story unless you understand the consumer story. And so I always appreciate people reaching out to me and telling me how these platforms have affected their lives, where they're running into trouble, and where they see opportunity.
That's wonderful. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your ideas and your wonderful book. Congratulations on this huge accomplishment. And we look forward to seeing all the interesting things you come up with going forward. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
Bye.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
If you enjoyed this episode of Into the Impossible, please subscribe, comment, share, rate, and review. For a chance to win a free copy of our most recent guest's newest book, send a screenshot of your review to info@imagine.ucsd.edu. We appreciate hearing from you and are always open to your suggestions for future episodes. For more information, go to imagination.ucsd.edu. Find us on Twitter @ImagineUCSD. Watch us on YouTube, listen on iTunes. Into the Impossible is a production of the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination in the Division of Physical Sciences at the University of California, San Diego. Eric Veary, Director. Brian Keating, Co-Director. Patrick Coleman, Associate Director. Produced by Stuart Valco.